Science, Part 2. And yes, we are recording this time. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, and last, but certainly not least, all of you with confirmation bias. You will find what you're looking for. It's inevitable. You're listening to Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, a family-friendly podcast where we logically speculate on life. Man, I almost got through that one, and I actually did that completely from memory, which is the first time I've not had to read a script, I think. So, even though I messed up that family part, I'm gonna claim some points on that, because I did it from memory. Half a point. I feel like 0.8. Not like 80% of a point. Come on.
I'll give you 75%.
I'll take it. That's a fair. Agreed. Shake hands on it.
All right,
it's a done deal. Nothing you can do about it. Oh, yeah, and I forgot to pause the camera recorder from the Part 1 episode, so it's been recording us this whole time.
Oh, well.
Nice. Oh, oops. Oops is right. All right, Trace, so kick us off with your fish fact for today.
The immortal jellyfish. Have you heard of it?
I think I have, yes.
So it's a jellyfish that can theoretically be immortal. In the right conditions, whether it be stress or whatever else. We haven't really observed it naturally yet, but in the right conditions, it can transform back into its polyp stage, which is basically a jellyfish larva. Polyps are just like a small growth. Coral are polyps. Polyps are in the medical field in some places. But so jellyfish, if they can theoretically live forever, if they're constantly reverting back to this polyp stage, growing up, getting whatever conditions, reverting back, and I could just go on and on and on and on. But with natural predation and stuff like that, it's near impossible. Okay,
so explain how this is a known thing, but it's theoretical then, since we're talking about observable science in the context of this episode series that turned into a series about science. I don't know, I just like saying science that way because it's kind of cool. But
they've done tests, in like labs and stuff, that in these certain conditions, stress conditions, whatever else, they'll turn back into this polyp stage and then grow up.
Okay, so it actually has been tested and observed in a lab. They're just inferring that this, in theory, could happen in the wild, but they don't know for sure because they haven't observed it happening in the wild. That's what you're saying?
Well, for them to be doing it in the lab, I think they have to be doing it in nature. It's just we haven't really seen it because it's hard to pinpoint the exact time and place where this could occur.
Okay,
or even if they do it at all in nature. I'm not
right.
I'm not sure if there even has been natural observations.
Okay, no, fair enough. I could get behind that. I think that makes sense. That's interesting. So next thing we'll probably be seeing is humans trying to study this so that they can take it and apply it to the human genome.
Oh, they already are.
I kind of figured, I'm going to say this, and they're probably already going to be doing it. Of course, because we want to live forever, right? I mean, that's just human nature.
That just seems like a nightmare to live forever. To me, to be honest.
What, on this earth or just in general?
On this earth.
Okay. So if you're going to say in general, I'll just be like, are you okay, buddy? Do we need to stop the episode here and get you a little bit of therapy or something? Because that's a little depressing, dude. All right. So we're going to do follow-ups before we jump into anything else. I got one more thing. It's
going to be very minor, like the last one.
You're minor. All right. So I got a real pet peeve with this Billy Carson guy that was on Joe Rogan. Just watching the stuff that he puts on his social media, it's blatant falsehoods. Blatant. He just made a claim on a post that I saw today that said that the people that were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the priests, they used, and he claims it says this in the biblical text, that they used gloves, specifically rubber gloves, to handle and move the ark. The Bible says nothing of the sort. The only thing the Bible says is that, hey, you need to use wooden rods to lift the ark as handles fed through it. So he's making up crap to promote Ancient Aliens. And it frustrates the crap out of me.
I didn't see Indiana Jones use rubber gloves.
Exactly. He just closed his eyes and everything was okay.
That's true.
That's the only follow-up I got. Since we're recording these in bulk, I haven't listened back to these episodes yet, so I don't know if I made any egregious errors in the last one. I definitely did.
That's going to be rough to do follow-ups on like 5 episodes ago.
I might just let them go, which will be hard for me. I don't like letting things go, as I think...
Not a fan of Frozen.
I'm the dad here, not you. No. No, that was good. I like it. All right, so let's shift gears here a little bit. I think that jumping into the topic here, I think that based in human nature, there's a little bit of a fear of natural disasters. There's a big fear of natural disasters, whether it's conscious or subconscious. I think that most people probably just don't want to accept that idea could happen. And so that's why the appeal of the theory of evolution is so real, because the theory of evolution offers quote unquote proved science that can give comfort to, no, natural disasters don't really happen all that much. It's more just gradual process for things instead of very spiked, sharp calamities. But that's just not what the evidence shows. So I'm going to show Trace a picture here as we're talking.
I love pictures.
Yeah. So I might try to put this in the show. That's a lot of effort, and it'll only be for the YouTubers and then the Spotify.
Just
and
tell
everyone.
them to look it up later.
Yeah. Well, it's a picture I took from my travels specifically, so it's not going to necessarily be. I don't know how I'll do this. Anyway, I'm going to describe this. You can still go look it up for yourself. But let's talk about the Grand Canyon. I went to the Grand Canyon back in 2019. Fantastic trip, by the way. That was a really awesome trip. But from the source of where the Colorado River starts with the Grand Canyon, there is a major inconsistency with how the evolutionary theory wants to try to present and explain this idea. So the evolutionists would have you basically believe, from the way the way the terrain is. This is just fact of how terrain is. The Colorado River would had to have flown upstream, or not upstream, excuse me, uphill to cut through a plateau. And you can actually see this on elevation maps of that region of the Grand Canyon. But so I'm going to show Trace a picture here. It shows 2 close, mesas or plateaus of the Grand Canyon. And then you can see another plateau in the distance. And this is facing towards the downflow of the Colorado River. So the Colorado River would be flowing towards me in this video. And so you have plateau A and B were once connected. And you can pretty clearly tell that because they're on opposing ends of the Grand Canyon. And then plateau C is further in the background, but it's lower elevation. And you can actually tell this in the picture, Trace. So plateau C has much lower elevation, more than just the curvature of the earth there.
Okay. I can see that, yeah. Yeah.
So these standard model explanations just don't make sense when you actually look at the evidence. I have a little bit of engineering, background in terms of understanding, map reading and basic physics. That doesn't make any sense. But they would propagate that, the Colorado River formed the Grand Canyon over millions and billions of years, just slowly eroding away. But that doesn't make any sense with what we see. I don't know. You see things like this, and the evolutionary theorists, the scientists, or whoever is propagating the theory, I don't even know who all would be the people I'm specifically addressing here, but whoever propagates the theory as absolute fact, they would point to things like the Grand Canyon and be like, look, this is proof of our side. When actually, no, that's objective evidence that you're taking and interpreting through your subjective worldview that actually doesn't make that much sense. It makes more sense from a biblical perspective, but then again, that is me also taking it from an objective evidence and interpreting it through a subjective worldview. So then the question becomes, which worldview is the one that fits? So to get a little bit philosophical here, I think you're always going to have questions. No matter what worldview you take, no matter what perspective you take on life, there's always going to be unanswered questions. You see this in the Christian belief system. There's a huge question of free will. That's why we did the Youth Pro and Free Will Dilemma, Youth Pro Dilemma and Free Will episode to talk about some struggles from a Christian perspective. From an evolutionary perspective, you have all of these holes. Every single belief system is going to have questions that sometimes can't really be answered. So everything requires faith. And so I don't think it's what can answer every question, because nothing's going to answer every question. From a Christian perspective, nothing's going to answer every question until, we all die and God's able to answer every question. But what makes the most sense? What answers the most questions? What has the least inconsistency logically, scientifically, everything else applying not just one form of understanding such as science and trying to apply it to everything, but applying everything in a very broad sense. Would you agree with all that?
It's a lot to process, but I think mostly, yeah. I did have the thought of, everything requires a little bit of faith, though, because...
Even evolution requires faith.
Yeah, I was going to say, I could say, okay, well, these people tell me this, and I believe that, but evolution would tell you this, and you believe that. That's still believing in something, having faith in something. It's either faith in religion or faith in science, which it's completely understandable if you take one side or the other, but I think it's healthy to have a little bit of, I think it's good to have a bit of both, if not faith, at least the knowledge or the questions, like you said, to have.
Yeah, I agree with you that faith is necessary for every single belief system. And I'm going to clarify something here, Trace, because this is something I've seen talking a lot with people on our social media platforms. People seem to get the idea of faith and blind faith confused. And that is a logical fallacy to equate them as one and the same. Blind faith is Trace tells me, I rode here on a pink unicorn that could surf rainbows. And I don't put a second's worth of thought into whether or not that's possible. I just agree.
As you should.
So I should have blind faith in you, all right. Versus hey, I have, what's a good example of more concrete faith? I'm gonna get a little personal here. So for me, my belief system, my belief in Christianity, I have faith not because the Bible says so, not just because of that, but because of things like prophecies, like hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, depending which prophecy we're looking at, before Jesus came, that predict his coming in very specific ways. And the people have calculated the probability of that as being exponentially low. It's basically zero. And yet Jesus came and fulfilled all that. That's one of many that I have for why I have faith. So it's not like, if you ask me why I believe, it's not a blind faith. I have my reasons for why this makes sense to me. And whether you're a Christian, whatever your belief system is, Muslim, Buddhist, Norse pagan, atheist, deist, polytheistic, monotheistic, it has to make sense, and you have to have a reason for what you believe. And most people do. Most people have faith in science and in evolution because they have faith in the evidence they've seen of basic scientific principles working from scientists. Therefore, there's a general trust for scientists in our culture. So therefore, if scientists claim something, it's automatically trusted because scientists say so. But I believe that's in its of itself a logical fallacy.
I was going to say,
yeah.
That's a little bit of blind faith to see something pop up on Facebook that says, whatever, science.
Wasn't there some article that says that Pepsi can increase testes size or something for men and help with testosterone, that science has shown this or something?
I have no idea about this.
Yeah, but just believing that and reading it and being like, oh yeah, I agree with that. That's blind faith in scientists and science. Mm-hmm. I look at that and I'm just like, I don't think so, but yeah, that's just me.
I know there's a lot that you've sent me or I've sent you that that rock formation thing off of the coast of Japan.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called.
I don't remember either.
But I was like, I'm not going to believe that. But, a good point of this is the so-called Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean meeting, but not mixing.
Yeah.
And, that's just misinformation being put out there.
Right.
And people will see that and be like, oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. I believe that. But... yeah. It's just nonsense.
And believing something just because of the source alone, I believe, is actually a logical fallacy as well. It's not even just blind faith. I forget which logical fallacy it is. But tell you
just
what.
The source?
Yeah. I'll tell you what. Let's take an ad break real quick. I'm going to look that up because we're about 15 minutes here, so we're due for one anyway. So we're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about logical fallacies real quick. All right, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, we are back from our ad break. And Trace, say something smart. I gotta take a note real quick here.
Ooh, let's see here. Sharks, they have a constant rotation of teeth, and frilled sharks are actually kind of cool because they have like, instead of kind of the rows that kind of fold out, I think they have like actual, like, I'm kind of.
Well, let's focus on the first one there that you presented, because now I'm intrigued. So are you talking about rotation as in they like rotate in a circle in their mouth? Like
No.
So you're just talking about like kind of like new sets of teeth are constantly coming in?
Yeah, they're
okay.
like if you look at a shark jaw, it'll have like the front row of teeth, but then there's these constant like folds behind it. So they're always like producing more and more teeth.
Okay.
And it's actually really fascinating once you like learn the methods of teeth, but anyway.
Fish nerd, 4 eyes. Okay, anyway, that's ad hominem right there. I apologize. Speaking of logical fallacies here, so we left off talking about how we needed to identify a fallacy. So I looked it up. It's the genetic fallacy. So it's accepting or rejecting a argument or any information solely based on the source. Rather than its content itself. So I propose, Trace and I were talking about this off the air. We should have just kept recording because it was a fantastic conversation.
I have a funny example of this, but I don't know if I should mention it on air.
Is it the one you just said?
No.
Oh boy. Well, if you don't know, probably not then. Is it political?
No, it's just funny.
All right, then go for it.
It's well, do your definition first, and I'll bring up an example.
Okay, yeah, but. Yeah, so I did define it, right? Yeah, like genetic fallacy.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
It's like if someone were to tell me, for example, that, hey, you shouldn't drive your car over a mountain if the radiator is leaking. And then someone tells you, oh, no, I drive cars for years. I know how they work. Kind of makes sense to listen to the people that have experience in an actual mechanic and someone who replaced the radiator.
Oh boy.
Instead of someone that just drives cars.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm not even going to address that one because I feel like that's going to turn into a rant in of itself. Trace is speaking from some personal experience on that one, and we'll leave it at that. But no, so the genetic fallacy, a great example of this would be, I'm not going to believe something because Answers in Genesis published it without looking at the evidence. Or likewise, I am going to believe a study because quote unquote scientists published it. That's also a genetic fallacy. You actually have to look at the quality and the quantity and what exactly the information is saying before you believe it. Otherwise, you're guilty of a fallacy. Now, that being said, there are nuances to this where I would believe things that Trace would say based on the source of it being Trace, but that's because of faith and relationships and trust that has been built there. It's not necessarily a blind faith where if he did tell me he rode a pink unicorn here surfing on a rainbow, I'd be like, dude, you're busting my chops, So there's still a little bit of healthy criticism there. But, if you told me, dude, I ran into Bigfoot on the way home, like, you and I don't joke about that kind of stuff. Like, I'm going to believe that, like I'm going to buy that. I actually have a friend that had an encounter with something that would probably have been Bigfoot. And that's kind of what sold me on thinking, okay, maybe Bigfoot is actually real and not some fake thing that's running around in the woods. Cause for years, that was my perspective, which is ironic because I'm wearing a Bigfoot Special Forces t-shirt now. So Bigfoot Special Forces. I don't know. I was going to try to say something really cool, but I got nothing. You have anything on genetic fallacy or do you want to keep going?
I think the name of it's kind of interesting because genetic.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
That's all you got?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's circle back to the Grand Canyon here then, because we went off on a tangent, and I'm not going to apologize for that like you. It's good to go off on tangents, Trace.
It's all the trauma.
I said gosh. Probably came through as me like saying something I shouldn't have, but I didn't. Again. All right.
Versus like a sailor.
All right. So apparently the Native Americans actually have legends of there being massive lakes to the north of the Grand Canyon. And they have legends as well of these lakes bursting in a great waterfall, like in not in like a literal waterfall, but like heavy rain. It caused lakes to overflow, and it caused the
Like the dam to break. So
Yeah,
to say.
like the natural dam to break, and that formed the Grand Canyon. So there's actually Native American legends of this in the area, and there's evidence of this as well with the petrified forest as well, which is very near. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. The petrified forest near the Grand Canyon, it's a forest that's been turned into rock because of just the natural processes of petrification, and there's all sorts of fossils and everything preserved in there.
My cousins used to get a lot of petrified wood from their like backyard.
Yeah, so it's around, and so actually these lakes that they're talking about, it would make perfect sense for them to have originated from the flood, and the receding flood waters to pull up and build in this area, and then to eventually just break. So, the whole Colorado, Arizona area would have been much more lush and green, kind of like how the Sahara used to be lush and green at one point, and then, things happened that changed that. This would be that catastrophic event that impacted it, I would think. So, canyons can form quick, and we know this from Mount St. Helens eruption. There's the mini Grand Canyon there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There's a canyon that formed over the span of, I think, hours or a couple days. Yeah, it's a little mini Grand Canyon near Mount St. Helens. And so we actually have, this is observed and even recorded, and it's been reported by people. So it's not quite maybe observable, and we literally can go and test it and repeat it right now. But people have seen this, firsthand eyewitness accounts have seen this and can report that this is a true thing that actually happened. So we know that canyons can form quick. So why couldn't the Grand Canyon form quick? Well, it doesn't fit the evolutionary model. So again, I think the evolutionary model just limits our thinking, and so I have issues with it. Yeah, we just shrugged at each other. I was hoping Trace would say something else smart, other than fish stuff. But
the only thing I could really say is that a lot of like Native American stories and legends and stuff, I would more so lean on the side of believing them. Right. I mean, of course, there's going to be some stuff that's just tall tales, but like tribes like that, they have a very strict oral tradition of passing stories down and stuff. Like the Aboriginal people of Australia, they have the most accurate oral history of any like tribal ancient people. Yeah, there are several different tribes around the world, I think, that are very strict on their oral traditions that they pass down because they know the smallest changes in words can add up over time. And so they keep their oral traditions very pure. So you're absolutely right. You hit on a fantastic point that sometimes these accounts are actually more reliable than the supposed science, I think, of guessing what happened millions of years ago because we're making a ton of assumptions and doing tests on things that we really don't know the rates of decay that we think we do, I think. Yeah. And then the Europeans come in and change everything.
Exactly. Yeah, one thing I'm a little bit upset about is some of the loss of Norse mythology because of the Christians taking over. That it's sad, to take and destroy another nation's culture like that, and to lose that history. There's probably a lot of information that could have confirmed stuff from a Christian perspective, I think, and been very useful for comparative mythology that's just gone now.
There's also a whole European folklore that's pretty much just disappeared. The earliest we really have of like legends or stories goes back to like King Arthur, I think, because like Tolkien, that's part of the reason why he created Lord of the Rings.
I was about to say that, yeah,
is because like he was upset that there was all of this oral history just lost to time because Anglo-Saxons or whoever just decided, oh well, we're gonna super Christianize stuff and make our own story.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. You're spot on there. So unless you have anything else on this, I'm going to shift over to our last topic. Well, yeah, our last topic, and it's going to be about the actual evolutionary changes of biology, unless you had anything else you wanted to interject into this conversation that we're having right now.
No.
All right, cool. So, no, we're not. We're going to take an ad break.
No. Okay, then.
Goodbye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mystery Seekers Musers, we have returned to talk about science with all of you. So we are going to shift gears here. We're going to talk about evolutional changes from parent to offspring. We're going to talk about mutations. We're going to talk about macro versus micro evolution. And I know people that are of the atheistic evolutionary perspective are probably really upset that I just used those terms, but it's true. There is a huge difference, and it's a sweeping generalization to say with absolute certainty that these small changes will eventually add up to something being a whole new species when we can never, ever observe that. So that's how I'm going to start this conversation here. So there's a number of missing links that we don't have in the fossil records. There's a couple species that people might be able to throw names around, but a creationistic perspective, like there's a fish with legs. That's one that comes to mind. That's supposedly a quote unquote missing link that's been found. But this could just as easily be explained from a creationistic perspective of, hey, God created this specific creature to walk, just to be a fish, but it also has the ability to use its fins as legs. Like
there's fish nowadays that can walk on land. There's lungfish.
I think that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
There's a shark that can even survive on land for a little bit, and it quote unquote walks. There's the mud skippers. They can survive on land. Yeah.
So this is proof and evidence, but we don't know of what. It's all dependent on how you subjectively want to interpret this evidence, and many people let interpretation bias filter in and determine how they read it. So one other thing I'm going to touch on here, I meant to touch on this at the beginning of the episode, and I got kind of distracted. Peer review process. One other thing I want to touch on this from the last episode. Peer review process actually excludes creation arguments. We've talked about this a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think to a degree it's good and it's understandable, because a lot of peer review studies should be focused around more on the specific observable and testable. So I get where it's coming from. I think it is good in a sense, but I think also when you're faced with big questions that we can't just know about, like the origins of life in the universe, I think that those kind of arguments from that perspective,
like the speculative arguments,
like hey, here's this scientific evidence, this could point back to a creator. I don't think that should be excluded. I think that's bad. Because so here's a good example. So the flood being of divine origins is not allowed in peer review, but there is stuff that's being published, I think in conjunction to Randall Carlson's work. Yeah, I think I'm getting that right. About like the Younger Dryas, and there being a meteor impact that actually caused a global flood in about 12,000 years ago, around that time period. That is being scientifically researched. And I don't know. It shuts down being able to explore all this stuff in as much depth as we should. I feel like there should be certain exceptions for certain topics that we can't test and observe to be able to say, hey, you know what? We can never figure out the origins of the universe. So if you want to assume a creation perspective and talk a little bit about science with that, from that perspective, there shouldn't be anything wrong with that.
I mean, I don't think it's also too outlandish to say that, there's a quote-unquote divine intervention, but it could still be scientific.
Exactly, and that's the other thing. There might be a science to divine. Let's humor me for a second. Let's say divine stuff is real, even if you don't believe it. Let's say miracles and everything is real. What if there's an actual science to that, but we just dismiss it because it's really hard to observe and it's really hard to test and repeat? Because God doesn't let himself be put into a lab experiment. But what if we actually approach this with the idea, instead of we can't test, observe, repeat it, therefore and it's got religious origins, so therefore not science. What if instead we approached it with, hey, how can we apply science to this? Could we apply science to this? And that's where I'm really excited about that quantum episode we got coming up here. Gosh. To be able to talk about two dimensions to time and how this indicates I guess I'm spoiling it here, but how it indicates that we have components to our universe we don't understand. And so what if there's extra dimensions we're still not grasping that manifest themselves as spiritual, but we just don't study them because we don't understand it. But in the fourth dimension, it makes perfect sense. I don't know. Let's shift gears here. Let's talk about DNA again, Trace.
Okay.
All right. So DNA. So offspring have, how do I word this here? The offspring has, when there's a reproductive cycle, the offspring has enough DNA to exist in of itself and to procreate with genetic information. So there's an excess of genetic information, but it's always going to have less than the parent. There's always going to be a loss. So for example, if you have blue eyes, you've lost the genetic, because blue eyes is a recessive trait. For those of you, I don't know, should I try to explain dominant recessive, or do you want to explain that because you're the biology guy?
Oh man, I haven't.
I can just explain it if you want.
Yeah, I feel like you might.
So basically,
on top of your head.
Those are those charts that you see that have like the top left corner is the capital AA, and then the lower left and top right is a uppercase A and a lowercase a, and then the bottom right is that double lowercase a. And so the capital A represents dominant, and the lowercase a represents recessive. So you can only have blue eyes. Blue eyes is a recessive trait. So you can only have blue eyes if you have the recessive trait of having blue eyes. So you could never, unless you marry someone that has that dominant trait of different colored eyes, you can never again, you as an individual, never again reproduce someone that has any really other color of eyes, unless there's something more recessive than blue eyes. I'm not sure. But like you can never have two blue-eyed people, have a kid together and that kid have brown eyes. If they did, somebody cheated. It's like that meme from the Incredibles. I don't know, I'm gonna ruin Incredibles for a lot of people now. It's like can a blonde and a redhead have a kid with black hair?
Yeah.
And they're like, nope. Like there's comments like, nope, impossible. Why do you ask? And they send a picture of Violet from the Incredibles, and it's like awkward.
She could have dyed her hair.
It's true, I guess, to match her name. I don't know, man. It's fishy. All right. So this is why sibling marriage causes problems, is because you have a lot of overlap of dominant and recessive traits that lead to these recessive traits becoming more expressed that are often very bad. That's why like the Habsburg jawline from the intermarrying of all of the royal families in Europe, like it was a really weak recessive jawline. That's why that became such a thing. So this is known in genetics. The further you breed, when you do selective breeding, the more problems you tend to have, the more susceptible you are to diseases. I know this from dealing with raspberries. I've grown a lot of raspberries. The more domesticated raspberries tend to struggle to survive in more wild environments and without a lot of nurturing, versus the wild variants of raspberries that have kind of that more... They're not refined down to produce massive berries. Like raspberries in the wild are a lot smaller. Strawberries in the wild are a lot smaller. A lot of the berries that we know are actually bred to be the way they are. So they are refined down. They have a lot of weaknesses versus like their original counterparts, like the red wine raspberry, thrives very well in this region of Pennsylvania and well throughout Pennsylvania. I think well throughout several other states. Because it has that genetic diversity and it's not been bred for that selective trait that's made it weaker. And so you have to bear all of this in mind when you're looking at evolution, is that the whole concept of evolution almost defies what we know about genetic, about breeding for selective genetic traits, in a sense. So yeah, the more you tend to breed and do selective breeding, the more problems you tend to have. Anything you want to add on that? I'm sure you've got a thought, Trace. This is science. This is biology. This is your world.
I feel like you're covering most of it. I mean,
I'm just that good.
I guess so.
Okay, cool. I just needed to hear it, Okay, so let's talk about fruit flies for a minute here. So we can't test or observe human evolution. That's impossible. We'd have to literally step outside of time to be able to do that. So we can't do that. That's impossible. But what if we could study something with a lot quicker reproductive cycle and see how that behaved? And so a scientist named Richard Goldschmidt did this experiment, and he did it on fruit flies because they have a gestation cycle of about a week. So reproductive cycle. Yeah. So he studied this for 50 years. He got no evolutionary beneficial traits. He got fruit flies with larger wings, smaller wings, no wings, legs growing out of its head instead of antenna, a fruit fly with 4 wings, but those wings had no muscles, so those wings were useless and actually an evolutionary disadvantage. Finally, after about 50 years of experimenting on fruit flies, bombarding them with radiation, toxic chemicals, having his controls, he throws up his hands and he says, even if you can accumulate 1,000 changes in a fruit fly, it'll still be nothing but an extremely bizarre fruit fly. So I will identify a problem here, because this was actually a useful comment from a social media person. The time scale that Richard Goldschmidt, I did a comparison of the time scale Richard Goldschmidt was comparing in comparison to a new species evolving of like Homo sapiens or something else like that. And Richard Goldschmidt was way short of that timeline. Even after 50 years of studying the gestation cycle of fruit flies, which is like a week, he would have had to have done, I think, another couple hundred years of studying, or at least like another couple decades. I don't remember. I don't have the exact numbers in my notes here, but that is a fair argument for the evolutionary case there, but then that puts into perspective the amount of time of the evolutionary scale. And that, I don't know, you're just throwing time at it and saying, oh, we can just add time to this and that fixes everything. Well, 0 multiplied by 0 is still, 1,000 multiplied by 0 is still 0. 0 multiplied by 0 is still 0. And so, again, I'll just throw all the ingredients for a cake outside. Eventually it'll bake itself into a cake. It's just, the argument isn't there. And people are going to be upset that I'm saying that, because I think, I'm going to say this as gently as I can, but I think people have been brainwashed to a degree. And so when you have a strong emotional response to something that I'm laying out a logical argument for, if you're having that, take a minute and just think about it. Why am I reacting this way? Why do I feel like I'm being attacked? Because oftentimes when you have an emotional response, it's from a deep-seated belief that might not even be true. And so deep you've made it a part of your identity and you don't even realize it, but it's not actually real. And I've had that with myself before, where I've had very strong feelings on something because someone says something that I disagree with, and then I'll think about it and be like, no, that person's actually right. So, I don't know. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm going to stop being counselor Josiah, and I'm going to start being science Josiah here. So, another question I'm going to propose about the fruit flies, Trace. Why haven't fruit flies gone extinct or evolved into something else then? Because they've been... We know, and we have evidence that they've been around for thousands of years, if not millions of years, and we have plenty of other species. This is why I had you do horseshoe crabs, even though it ended up being last episode and not this episode, that have existed for thousands, if not millions of years, and just not changed. Dragonflies, fruit flies, mosquitoes, cockroaches, and horseshoe crabs, and others have stayed the same and not changed.
There's also a theory that everything will eventually evolve into a crab. I don't know, but a lot of a lot of those evolutionary trees, they all kind of diverge to a point where it's just a crab. I don't know any of the details about it, but I know that's a theory out there. But
why wouldn't the crab share?
What?
Why wouldn't the crab share?
Why?
Because he was shellfish.
Okay.
All right. So another good perspective from Answers in Genesis. Again, this is from, I forget his name, but it's from one of their lead biologists from a couple of years back. He said that approaching it from a biology perspective, even if you gave evolution everything else it needed, but you didn't give it the placenta, there wouldn't be a chance for evolution. Even with everything else, but just the placenta missing, evolution doesn't have a statistical chance. It's 0% in his perspective. And why he says this is because you only have one shot to get the placenta right. The placenta is what feeds the baby nutrients, and it's what separates the mom's blood from the baby's blood. If you don't get that right on the first try, you have to have a separate man and a woman at that point to be able to reproduce that child. If you get the placenta wrong, those two can't have a baby, and you've got to restart all the way from scratch again. Just that alone would derail the whole evolutionary theory. And yet we are expected to believe, because the genetic fallacy, scientists claim that all of this stuff just happened by chance, and you give enough time, it'll be fine.
Well, I think with the evolutionary theory, it would argue that, over time, things adapted to have a placenta. It's not just humans suddenly appeared.
Well, right, but you have to be able to adapt to have that placenta, and you have to be able to get that right. And then you have to get everything else right on top of that, because that's just assuming this is a biologist argument. This is not my argument. But from this biologist's perspective, you have to get that right. You have to.
Yeah.
Even if you have everything else, that's still such an improbable chance that evolution is basically unprovable.
Yeah, I see where the point is, but I think they might be looking at it a little too narrowly.
That's fair. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, and I don't remember this biologist's name. I just remember he was Answers in Genesis. He was at a conference that I went to that they had back in high school. So I know we talked about this. I think you're going to disagree with me here, and that's fine.
Okay.
For me, my point of contention with evolution, aside from everything else I've laid out, it's one word: homoplasy. And I only recently learned this one here. So according to the evolutionary model, homoplasy is where different creatures evolved the same trait independently of each other. For example, birds and bats evolving wings completely independently of each other. According to the evolutionary model, they don't have any common ancestor at all. That's wild to me, because then we're throwing in even more statistical unlikeliness. We're saying, oh, but if you give enough time, it'll happen. But not just once, it's going to happen multiple times. And homoplasty isn't just for that trait I've listed here. There are, I believe, several other dozen, maybe I'm getting that wrong, but there are multiple other traits that we are told by scientists, oh, all these evolved independently of each other. But don't worry, it all makes sense. We believe it.
What are those different instances, though?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I know there are more, because there's a whole term for this, homoplasty. Like there's a whole broad term. But that is just one example I have off the top of my head, where you have bats and birds evolving wings independently of each other. For me personally, and you can disagree with this, Trace, I'm not gonna be offended, but for me personally, that's just too much of a leap. Like to say, with everything else and how much of a leap I'm already expected to take with believing in evolution, saying that not only do we have this occurring once, but we have this occurring multiple times independently, I don't know, man. That doesn't check out for me.
Well, I would say everything is going to be a leap whenever you're speculating like this. You could say that there's a bunch of leaps in like divine intervention kind of stuff too. So everything is going to have its leaps and whatever else. It just all depending on what you believe.
I think leaps make a lot more sense from some kind of divine intervention than just natural processes given enough time.
Yeah, to you it would.
Right, yeah,
sense. But like to other people, it's going to be like, okay, this,
but,
in our speculative looking at this, I could see this making sense.
No, I would agree that there are multiple ways to look at things, and I would say first and foremost, you got to believe what makes sense to you. If something doesn't make sense to you, like if Christianity doesn't make sense to you, you need to be convinced in your mind that Christianity is real. I don't want you to believe this because you feel any pressure from me or anyone else. Absolutely going to say that first and foremost. I know we've said that before on the show, but I will say, I don't know. I don't think it's even just me. I think it's a little bit more of an objective perspective to be able to say some kind of divine intervention in any capacity, whether you're talking about creation of the universe or anything else. And I mean, I don't know, this might be towing the line of logical fallacy world, but I think that's a little bit easier to attribute things that you don't understand to a divine source rather than just saying, oh, give it enough time. Because that's trying to go outside the bounds of science and still apply science in a very extreme, dangerous way. To say, oh, we just give this enough time, everything will be okay. Versus like, oh, we give this a divine creator, everything will be okay. It's giving, the source is getting more power when you're looking at it from a theistic perspective rather than from an atheistic perspective. Does that make sense? That's kind of what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from, but I still think there's an argument that could be made for the other side.
Certainly. And I absolutely can make an argument for the evolutionary perspective. I mean, there are arguments against the Christian faith as well that exist. And so, yeah, I have no problem with that. And just in my mind, and I think a little bit more objectively as well, if you sit and think about it, I think it does just make, by definition, it makes just a little more sense to say, hey, divine origins explain the unknown a little bit better than just adding time to it. That's all I'm trying to say here.
Well, yeah.
So I kind of beat around the bush.
In the grand scheme of things, if you just kind of magically apply, like, oh yeah, some entity just did this.
Right.
I feel like that's just drawing a quicker conclusion, because there's more to the explanation of evolutionary theory than just add time to it too.
Right. But then, so yeah, I'm not trying to say that's an absolute proof or disproof, because then that would be a logical fallacy. So I'm not trying to prove or disprove the existence of God solely on that claim or argument. So I do want to clarify that.
I think this might go back to the conversation we just had about like having faith in different things. Of course, you're going to believe that the divine intervention is a little more believable to you because that's what you believe. But people that would believe in science, they're going to believe, okay, I can make sense of, in the grand scheme of billions and billions of years, birds and bats getting wings together, in a million different species, in the grand scheme of the evolutionary theory, it all seems to come from the impossible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so for this coincidence to happen in already an impossible situation that we're trying to wrap our head around, do you see how that could kind of like?
Yeah,
I could see that making sense.
Yeah,
in that
I mean,
aspect.
you could argue either way. I think, sure. I think I think that there's more power behind saying a divine being than saying time. That there's naturally more creative force that's implied there. Now people would hear that and be like, oh, so then that means that we just can't answer these questions. Well, no, I think we should study with science the idea of God creating out of nothing and try to study that with science and try to apply stuff. And that's where I would stretch science in a different way that often doesn't get stretched. And that's the whole point of the M-Quad theory, the M-Quad podcast, is that looking at the fourth dimension from a scientific perspective and saying, what if this is the spiritual? So yeah. I don't know. I see where you're coming from. I don't think it's just me. I think it's more by definition, but again, that's not a proof or disproof necessary. I think I'm just splitting hairs at this point.
Everything's just speculation. So
right,
there's not really any way to prove billions of years of evolution. There's not really any way to necessarily prove a divine intervention kind of thing.
Both require faith.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick ad break, and then we'll be back to finish up this conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, science. We are back. I am your main host, Josiah, and my co-host, Trace, is sitting right here with me.
I thought you said man host. I was like,
I am indeed a man. I am indeed a man. All right. Oh, man. Epigenetics. That's another fun one. So traits that are expressed via environmental factors. I don't have a good example of this one off the top of my head, but it's more just traits that get brought out because of certain needs of the environment or certain dietary things. And this can either be beneficial or detrimental. But the idea of epigenetics also adds in another dimension to evolution. It doesn't prove or disprove it either way, but it just adds in another dimension that, hey, some of these microevolution traits that we're seeing, it might just be influenced by the epigenetics of environment. It's not actually necessarily mutations in terms of moving towards being like a bird turning into a dinosaur, something like that. Mutations are rarely beneficial, and they by no means equate that one thing is going to change into something else entirely. That is a gigantic leap in assumptions to say that, in fact. Mutations are actually generally... I don't want to quite say they're a loss of information, but they're kind of a trade-off, like a tit for tat. Like I'm losing one thing, but I gain something else. It's usually not an addition of information quite. It's just a change in a small trait. That's usually what mutations are. Most mutations, though, are bad, and they're trade-off. Sickle cell disease is one, where the blood cells have a sickle shape to it and they can't carry oxygen properly. And so the individual that has it then struggles to get oxygen delivered to their body. There's a lot of examples of mutations like this. So in conclusion here, because we're going to wrap up this episode, the theory that if I were to be an evolutionist, if I were to be an atheist, the theory I would most buy is the hybridization theory. So this comes from Dr. Eugene McCarthy, and there is not a lot of backing to this idea yet from what I'm aware. I haven't looked into it a ton. But I do think it's going to hit the spotlight because of some of these gaps in the evolutionary theory over the coming decades and years. But it actually proposes the idea that certain things, such as humans, are actually hybrids and not evolved through the typical evolutionary process. That they are the product of monkey and pigs breeding together. That, to me, sounds more plausible than just throwing time at it, is to say that there was some catalyst event to start humanity and even start life in general, that there was some catalyst event than to just say, oh, you just give it enough time, anything will happen. Like, I don't know. And I don't think that that's my definition specifically. I just think that that's just the objective definitions of, saying, hey, that there was some actual like real catalyst event that happened, like pigs and monkeys breeding together, and that's how you got humans. I can see that as being much more viable than just saying, oh, well, give monkeys enough time, eventually they'll turn into humans. Like, I don't know. And you might disagree with me on that. That's fine. I'm not going to change my perspective. I don't think you're going to change your perspective. That's fine. But that's kind of where I stand.
That just feels like a wild claim, because like if that's the case, we should be able to repeat that too.
That would definitely defy some form of scientific like ethics laws, I think, to try to do something like that.
Really.
So, but no, you're right. We should, and that would actually be a way to scientifically test to see, could you actually get a human from mixing.
That seems more testable than
exactly
millions of years of evolution.
Exactly. So that now we're taking this idea and we're actually quantifying it into testable and repeatable science. And that's where I think it gets interesting. But there's a lot more to his theory. He, from my understanding of it, he kind of contrasts the traits of humans between like the similar traits they have between monkeys and pigs. And that's kind of how he builds his theorization that we're actually hybrids, which kind of blew my mind the first time I heard that. I was definitely put off by that idea. But I just want to get that out there. I think that that's personally, to me, that makes more sense than just throwing time at the equation. And I think that we're going to see that become a little bit bigger and more prevalent of a theory in maybe the next 50 years. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm usually not, though, you know? Rude. All right. Well, that being said, how about you give us our creature facts so we can wrap up here?
All right. So I feel like you might be familiar with this since it's a PA legend. Have you heard of the squonk?
I think I have. Yeah, isn't this some like gnome troll kind of thing?
It's just a
that's
super
shy?
ugly pig.
Yeah.
Won't ever be seen in public because it's so ugly.
Yeah.
And it knows it. But it's it's one of those like lumberjack tales, like Paul Bunyan, something like that. A lot of American, there's a term for it, but like a lot of like American folklore and stuff, not just Native American, just American.
So like first settlers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is from like lumberjack camps. There's all kinds of stories of lumberjacks. But the squonk is just a very ugly pig kind of creature that its skin is all wrinkly. It doesn't fit, covered in warts and all kinds of stuff, and it's always depressed because of how ugly it is.
It sounds like you're describing me in the mornings, man. Come on.
But yeah, it could also, if it's cornered, it can dissolve itself in its tears.
I don't know what to do with this information. I'm not going to lie. I am familiar with the squonk, though. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless you have anything else you're wanting to add on other than just the facts of it, I think we'll wrap up here.
No, I think we're good.
All right. Well, if you want to get a hold of us, you can email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. If you want to get a hold of us on Instagram, TikTok, see the content that we post, you can find us at m.quad.musings. If you want to find us on Facebook, you can find us on Facebook under Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. Just type that in. We'll pop up and look for the Phoenix logo. With that being said, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. Whether you're listening on the earth, below the earth, or above the earth, we appreciate your patronage, and we would also appreciate your support by pushing that like button, giving us a good rating, or giving us a subscribe, depending on the appropriate platform you're listening on. Everything you do helps. Feel free to participate with the show. Feel free to reach out to us, send us your thoughts. If you have something you want to add to these conversations, I foresee doing listener communication episodes. I would like to have enough listener interactions to be able to do that. So please, if you have thoughts, interjections, questions, especially on upcoming topics like the UFO topic that we're going to be delving into, the occult, send us your confessions, concessions, all of that. I forgot that whole spiel. I used to have that memorized. Now I don't. But yeah, send us whatever you have. We're wanting you to participate in the conversation as well. So don't feel like this is just Trace and I lecturing you. This is all of us here sitting and having a conversation, transcending the walls of time.